Good evening, everyone. My name is Livia Meneghin. I use the she series of pronouns, and I'm a board member of the Writers' Room of Boston. I'm so happy to have this evening and share the space with you on this very cold January day in Boston for our virtual series, The Readings from the Room. For anyone new to us, the Writers' Room is a co-working space in downtown Boston for any and all writers, established and emerging, who want or need a quiet place to write 24 hours a day. We've been serving the writers of Greater Boston area since 1993. During and since the pandemic, the room offers online resources, including this reading series, as well as an online series of interviews with guests knowledgeable about topics such as getting your work to a publisher, agents, or guidance for online publishing. Please contact us if you're curious or have any questions about the room and its programs at info@writersroomboston.org or check out our Facebook and Instagram at Writers of Boston. I can put all of that in the chat for you all later. We always welcome new folks into our community, and we have different levels of membership, including a virtual membership for those who can't easily make it to the room. So if you're interested, please check out our website, writersroomboston.org. In 2021, we launched this reading series as a way to reach out to the writing community during the pandemic and share wonderful writing representing a range of genres. This series is made possible by grants from the Mass Cultural Council and the Boston Cultural Council, and we also rely on friends. So if you enjoy this event, please consider making a contribution using the donation button on our website. Also, we will be recording this reading, and a replay will be available on our website, along with other past events. Tonight we have two readers who I'm very thrilled to introduce to you all, Erin Caycedo-Kimura and Tatiana Johnson-Boria. As we go along this evening, feel free to use the question and answer feature in the box at the bottom of the screen, where you can type in your questions and we will have time for a discussion brief at the end. So our first reader is Erin Caycedo-Kimura. I'll welcome him to join us. Erin Caycedo-Kimura is a writer and visual artist. He is the author of two poetry books, the full-length collection Common Grace from Beacon Hill Press 2022, and Ubasute, the winner of the 2020 Slappering Hall Press Chapbook Competition. His honors include a MacDowell Fellowship. Well, we have two MacDowell folks here. A MacDowell Fellowship, a Robert Pinsky Global Fellowship in Poetry, a St. Botolph Club Foundation Emerging Artist Award in Literature, and nominations for the Pushcart Prize, Best of Net, and Best New Poets anthologies. His work has appeared or is forthcoming in Beloit Poetry Journal, Rhino, Plume Poetry, Poetry Daily, Shenandoah, Pyrenees Foundation, Salamander, Cave Wall, and elsewhere. Erin earned his MFA in creative writing from Boston University and is also the author and illustrator of Texts Don't Call, an illustrated guide to the introverted life from Tarcher Perigee 2017. So I'll give the floor to Erin.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Livia, for having us tonight. And thank you, everyone who's tuned in for coming out to hear our reading. I'm very happy to be here. Very honored to be reading with Tatiana. I'm going to read for you 5 poems from my book, Common Grace. And these poems are about my parents. And the first poem I'm going to read is a Malaysian pantoum, and it's entitled Burial. I return my father's body to the earth, cremated as he instructed in a letter. No funeral, no obituary in the newspaper. Those who needed to know were told. I had his remains cremated as he instructed, scattered his ashes in Bodega Bay. Those who needed to know were told that I waited until my mother passed to scatter his ashes in Bodega Bay, past the jetty where we used to fish. I waited until my mother passed, poured out their dust together, past the jetty where we used to fish, from the deck of the Miss Anita, seagulls calling overhead. I poured out their dust together with a handful of Uncle George from the deck of the Miss Anita, seagulls calling overhead. No funeral, no obituary in the newspaper. With a handful of Uncle George, I returned their bodies to the earth. My next poem is about my parents when they first got married, before my sister and I came along. And this poem is entitled The Hardest Part. The fire truck siren downstairs raided the air of my mother's dreams. She'd scream in her sleep, my father told me, even after we married. More than a decade past the Second World War, for him, American concentration camps, for her, the firebombing of Tokyo. They moved into a San Francisco apartment that rented to Japs, a one-bedroom walk-up above the Post Street fire station. They painted their bathroom black. It was in style then. Shelved books, unboxed a new rice cooker, watered a shrub of Japanese maple, potted for their future garden. When the station got a call in the middle of the night, the rumble of the overhead door crumbled into the wreck that was once her home. Swirling lights flashed ancient trees into flames through the thin silk curtains of her eyelids. No warning, no drill, no cover. My father stilled her body, his broad hand on her shoulder or hip, as they lay in the dark, listening to the slowing of her breath. The hardest part of those nights, he said, was waiting, sometimes hours, for the truck and the men to come back. The very last word of my next poem is the word two, and that's number two, TWO. And the title of the poem is When You're the Sun, and that's SON, sun. When you're the sun, it doesn't matter if you're the youngest. Call the hospice nurse to the house to pronounce your father dead. Close the bedroom door. Give your mother the privacy she needs to tell him he left too soon. When the nurse phones the funeral home, ask your sister to take your mother to his garden to grieve with the ginkgo, pine, and pin oak. Don't let her see the dark-suited men, the gurney, the body bag. Try not to feel bad that your father's wearing only a diaper. As he's wheeled out his front door, loaded into the back of a hearse, don't think about the neighbors watching. Keep moving. Break down the hospital bed, the one delivered this morning, so your mother won't have to smell it. Finally, forgive yourself for lifting him into that bed, crushing his lungs, ending him an hour sooner, maybe two. The title of my next poem is my mother's name. Her name was Hama. It's a Japanese name. And it's spelled exactly how it sounds, Hama, H-A-M-A. Hama. I ease a pen into the curl of mom's hand, ask her to sign a check. She sits on the edge of her bed, barely lucid, slowly forms H, a faint blue ballpoint cursive, a ripple, an echo, H, A. Again, her hand can't write what comes next. Her name is Japanese for beach. I say, it's okay. Help her lie back, wonder as her eyes close if her memory washes ashore somewhere. Goat Rock, Doran Park, bright and blustery, where with bare feet, pant legs rolled up, she watches I don't toddle too far into the surf. And I have one more poem I'd like to read for you, and this one's about my mother as well. And thank you again. Thank you again for tuning in tonight. And thank you, Livia, for having me. This poem is entitled Afternoon Infusion. She panics 3 hellos as if startled by the noise of an empty house. Calls from St. Joseph's. The nurses are slow to start her hydration. I'm at a bar. Stevie Nicks reverbs in my beer, lures me back to the edge of 17 in this town I left 30 years ago. I take her call outside, stand away from the smokers. Half truth, I'm at the mall. She slurs a request, milk of magnesia, and that other thing she can't remember. But I remember when I was a boy, she told me about the mythical Japanese custom, ubasute. A grown son lifts his aged mother on his back, delivers her to a mountain, leaves her to die. I'll come pick you up after chemo, I say, and hang up, realizing she's already cradled by the mountain. The waft of cigarette smoke and hint of manure in Santa Rosa air usher me back into the restaurant. The hostess smiles, welcomes me. Clueless, I have come and gone. Thank you. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Aaron, so much. Wow. I just love the attention to sound and all your verb choices. And I remember rumble in one poem and curl in another really stood out for me. But maybe I can ask you about that later. I'm just also putting in the chat again, just to remind folks ways to contact the writer's room if they would like. And now I'll introduce our next reader, Tatiana Johnson-Boria. Tatiana Johnson-Boria, she, her, is the author of Nocturne and Joy 2023 that just came out. Very exciting. She's an educator, artist, and facilitator who uses her writing practice to dismantle racism, reckon with trauma, and to cultivate healing. She's an award-winning writer who's received distinguished fellowships from Tin House, the Massachusetts Cultural Council, the MacDowell Residency, and others. Tatiana completed her MFA in creative writing at Emerson College and teaches at Emerson College, Greb Street, and other places. Find her work in or forthcoming in Plowshares, Kenyon Review, Pleiades, among others. She's represented by Lauren Scovel at Laura Gross Literary, and I'm so pleased to hear more of your poems. So Tatiana, take it away.
Thanks so much, Livia. Thank you for having me. And Erin, it's so great to do this reading with you. It's been lovely just hearing your poems and also reading them before this reading. So yeah, thank you for having me. I actually did a fellowship at the Writers Room of Boston in 2018, and it was super wonderful for my writing at the start before I started my MFA. So it's really nice to be here. So I'm going to just read a couple of poems. First, I want to just give a little preface about what I've been thinking about in terms of reading for today. As Livia said, I had the immense honor of publishing a book called Nocturne and Joy, which I'll be reading some poems from. And still kind of surreal that this book is out here. So I'm going to share a couple of poems from the book. And, I was thinking today about the elegy because, as, Livia mentioned, I teach at Emerson. We're working on the form, the elegy. And I was really inspired by today's class and changed all the poems I'm going to read. So it's, a little bit of a shift here, but I've been really thinking about since, working with the students today on the elegy about how it's not the elegy solely isn't a way of reckoning with grief, but it's also, or writing about death or a poem about death. It's also about witnessing. And we read today 800 Libations, a poem by Tiana Clark, which is about Khalif Browder, who died by suicide after being released from Rikers Island prison after serving 800 days in solitary confinement without trial. And in her discussion of the poem we were looking at in class, she talked about how Black death is caged by great violence and breathlessness. And she also said that it's a privilege to turn away from news that makes us uncomfortable. How her poem is a response to that. And I was, thinking about that today and how the students really felt moved by this poem and thinking about our current world, the current genocide in Palestine, and thinking about how poetry often doesn't feel like enough to do anything in our world, and where there is so much death. And my students were really making me think about the elegy and wondering if the elegy not just isn't about grief, but about protest. And perhaps it's a way of looking at death and witnessing death and the context to which the death has occurred. And maybe that's the way the elegy works, about calling into focus the death and what has ended someone's life. So I'm going to read two elegies from the collection. The first is about two young Black girls who, between 2018 and 2019, witnessing. Their names are Nevaeh Adams, who was 5 years old, and Camille Cupcake McKinney, who was 3 years old. I was really astounded by this story because they went missing, and around the same time, one was in Alabama and one was in South Carolina. And another thing about this book, it talks about my family's origins from the South. And both of them were found dead in dumpsters in completely different states. And it rattled me, and it still rattles me to think of their death, and the words don't feel like enough. But I'm going to read about an elegy I wrote for them. And then after that, I'll read another elegy about my uncle and his death from cancer in 2017, and just how that poem was developed from me staring at a microwave, warming up food for him. And after that, if there's time, hopefully I'll read a poem that isn't an elegy, but takes place in a cemetery. So thank you for listening. Elegy for Camille Cupcake McKinney and Nevaeh Adams. They both return, the people grieve. They are found unlike how they are remembered. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. How the sun must have wept the nights they were missing. How the earth caves barren for their unreturning. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. The sky rings itself. The torrents rage in clouds. Their smiles are gone. Weep for the promise of their origin. Weep for the glints they echo into the dark. Weep for the grim journey outside of a womb. Weep for lost time. Weep for a belly of cackles resounding. I should also note that's the first time I've read that poem aloud, so thank you for being here to listen to that. This poem is called Another Death. The microwave whirs the hospital beef stew to simmer. The air glides through the tube of my uncle's breathing machine. These breaths monitored, his black hands pull the mask away. Chapped lips sip stew. His breathing stops for a second between each bite. How much we are held in suspense of his lungs. He is the first son, the only of his mother's children to die. We do not know just how this has happened, but here we are caring for a grandmother's dream. In the beginning, a Black boy in the 50s, a segregated image, before civic dreams, is a 2-year-old on a beach in North Carolina, dressed in a suit by a Black woman who knew the importance of looking like you came from somewhere good. He did. From 2 parents who loved like sand crumbling against patent leather shoes. From their friction erupts a Black family who will buy a home, car, a slow anger, a joy, a religion, the belief that their children will be fine. Like most Americans, even when the years prove otherwise, even when protecting your children is another form of faith, a hope that is really just a home on this same beach, disappearing with each rush of the wave, until the only thing left is a photo showing he really did live once. His family was just like any other blooming dogwood, just like any other Southern ancestor brought to the North to live, to never return. This is the story of another way Black men die. How time chips away just as much life as a brutal country. How cancer makes a home in all of us taking the years, the stories as slaves, one by one. This next poem, as I said, takes place in a cemetery, and I believe this will be my last one. Before we begin the lowering, we feel immortal above the ground, walking among willows grieving, the body is withering, the passing brings us here. We can't help but return when the earth calls them. We follow their following of sound. The ground can't help but cave to the weight of our feet. It absorbs the heavy above, while cradling ancestors below. My cousin's cousin, a small boy twice removed, his crown of tangled roots, his knees sullied with joyful falling, swiftly brushes by me. His shrieks of joy startle the cemetery's quiet. He runs between gravestones unabashed as the aunties reach to shush him, quelling his speed to a stop. He is happy with a knowing. We are sad with having once known. They're already dead. His voice, buoyant echo. Our faces soften at the honesty of this moment, at the grin growing, crescent on young Black skin. We laugh at the life existing in his words. The poplars stretch above us. The wind rattles through. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tatiana. Wow. There's one line that you read, we don't know how this happened, but here we are caring, and that's just really hitting me a lot, and I'm gonna sit with it all evening. But I'll welcome you both back for we have 6 minutes maybe we'll go over if it's getting juicy, but we'll have a good conversation. Um, I also, as we talk, if you have questions for each other, feel free to do that. I don't want to um, dominate the conversation, but um, I wanted to ask you both about both of you include natural elements in your poems in different ways, and how does using them help you write about people instead of referring to like corporeal things or personalities, or and not that those aspects don't exist in your poems, but how do the poplars inform us about, so and so, or that sort of thing. So that's for either of you or both of you.
Yeah, I mean, you just mentioned the poplar, so I could talk first about it. I, that poem was about a moment that I vividly remember, and I vividly remember silence and also just like the sound of wind going through the leaves. And I felt like that I wanted to try to capture that sound somehow. I don't know if it does it well, but that's kind of what I was thinking. And the poplar trees was also kind of a little nod to Strange Fruit by Billie Holiday. And, I really love, I don't know, it's such a moving song and a moving performance that she does. And it's a kind of a moment of joy and pain kind of intermingling. And I wanted to bring that in without actively saying, and then Strange Fruit is playing in the background of this moment. But it I didn't think about it then. But in my with my current self now, I'm like, that was there in that moment. So I think that I could only say that from the natural or thinking about things in the setting or landscape.
When I write about my father, it's very easy to make references to nature because my father was a very outdoors kind of guy. Um, he was born on a farm, and he always told me that my grandfather sired the children to work the farm. So, but as a professional, he was a physical therapist, but he spent all his free time either fishing or in the garden. So it's very easy for me to include those elements in talking about him to give a fuller picture of who he was, and as well as what he experienced, as to the best I can do that.
Yeah, thank you. And I kind of a follow-up, but writing people who are alive and writing people who are not alive probably bring up different tensions in different ways. I don't want to simplify the question as which is easier, but how do you take care of yourself as you're going through either one or both, if it's different ways or the same way?
Hmm. I guess I'll start this one first. You know, I guess a general statement about when I write about my parents, they've both passed away. My father in 2011, my mother in 2015, and I write about them as a way to kind of keep them alive in my life. So it's almost no, not almost. It is a pleasure
Mm.
to remember them and think of them, and write about them. Um, I don't think, for me, um, writing about people who have passed away is easier or harder than people who are alive. I treat them both the same. Try to treat, if I'm writing about someone who's alive who I know, or about my parents or aunts or uncles, I always do my best to treat it with respect. And I don't. My parents were great. They were wonderful, and I'm very fortunate to have had them as my parents. They weren't perfect. No one's perfect. And so I have a lot that I could say, but why do that? Those are things that I don't necessarily think about. I usually think about the funny things that they do and that I repeat as their son.
It's interesting, like the poem that I read about my uncle, I forgot to mention this, but I feel like I never really knew this uncle. He's just like the oldest child of my mother's siblings, and he felt the most removed. He was just like every time I saw him, he was just watching football or something. It was like I just didn't know who this person was. Like I know he was like very close to my mother, and my mother like loves him, and I just didn't know him in that way. And for his funeral, I was asked to write a poem about it, and it's not the poem I read, but I wrote a poem, and I was like, I can't believe I could write anything, you know. But there was so much in going through his things after his death that I learned about him that painted his life. But that moment when he, was dying in the hospital was, I feel like, the most intimate moment that
Mm.
I would have never imagined doing that with him and or like feeding him. And it changed my view of him. And I feel like that was the only way I probably could have written about him. And I don't know, as Erin said, if it's easier or harder writing about someone who's alive versus who's passed away, but I don't think I would have ever been able to write about him without that moment. But
Mm.
I also write a lot about my mother, and she's still alive, and it's been one of the the hardest things in my life writing about her. So maybe it is harder writing about someone who's alive for me.
Well, from what I've read so far, all your poems about your mother can be very and are very meaningful to a lot of people. That not that that is always and only the goal, but I will at least say that from what I know. Um, but I just want to wrap it up with a final more simple but maybe challenging question. Who are you reading right now? Or what would you recommend?
I'm
For some
actually not,
people it's so easy, but for others
not
it's like, wait a minute.
I'm not reading poetry right now.
That's
I'm
fine. That's fine.
finally catching up um, to Robert Pinsky's Jersey Breaks, his memoir, which is
Yeah,
so incredibly fascinating. Um,
great. Thanks.
I am reading a book that feels it's like kind of self-helpy, but it's called Untamed by Glennon Doyle. It was like a really big book a few years ago.
Yeah.
I I really fell into the podcast We Can Do Hard Things. And I was like, let me read this book. And it's a kind of formulaic book, which is actually helping me think about nonfiction. I'm working on a nonfiction project. And I definitely eschew any sort of uniformity as a poet, especially sometimes. And it's actually helping me think about how to be neater. I don't know, in a way. So
Great.
yeah, that's what I've
Thank
been
you.
reading.
Thanks. Well, thank you both really, Erin and Tatiana, for just really wonderful reading. You're both very good at speaking your words into spaces. And thank you everyone who joined us. We'll return next month. It's already February in a few days, but we'll return next month on February 27th. We'll have a poet and a novelist. My good friend, both good friends of mine actually, Emily Lou Gao and Anna Burke. So good night, everyone. Thank you again. Stay warm. Have a great rest of your evening, and we hope to see you next month.